The detail of war appears chaotic. But the apparent lack of order doesn't mean that there aren't rules governing the modern battlefield. That's why, while every British soldier is protected by some form of armament, the commanding officers now also require the protection of a lawyer. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Rissius, for example, a specialist in international law, particularly the all-important Geneva Conventions and Protocols.
The Army Board has laid down in an Army training directive that every recruit must be given instruction in the subject. Every officer, as his career progresses, must be given increasingly more instruction in the subject. And finally, legal officers are provided to advise commanders on the application of those laws in time of war.
There's a team of 6 lawyers on 24-hour call in the Gulf now. This film is one of the methods the Army uses to push home the message and give all British soldiers specialist training on the subject of the rules of war.
You must not alter your weapons or ammunition in order to increase their effect.
Oi! What are you up to, Bretnell? I've got to make sure I get the bastards first time. No way, give it here!
It details what they must do and also how they mustn't behave. British troops and their commanders basically abide by a series of international agreements, although these may not be applied by an enemy. The 1925 Geneva Protocol, which prohibits poison gas and biological weapons. The 1949 Geneva Conventions, which cover the treatment of the wounded, prisoners of war and civilians. And the 1977 Geneva Protocols, which increase protection for civilians and cover environmental damage. The rules are straightforward, their application often isn't.
The rule that civilian casualties have got to be kept to a minimum, so far as it's practical to do so, can mean that in some cases a commander's got to accept higher losses among his own troops as a means of sparing the enemy's civilian population.
And even something simple like a surrender can have pitfalls.
There's a good example of that from the Falklands conflict, when some Argentine soldiers raised a white flag. A British officer from the parachute regiment went forward intending to receive their surrender, and an Argentine machine gun opened up on him from a flank, killing him.
However, in the Falklands, both the Argentinians and the British were generally praised for their adherence to the laws of war. While treating prisoners and telling opponents the location of field hospitals are of obvious benefit, but the rules have been broken.
In the Vietnam War, I think the clearest example was the massacre at the village of My Lai in 1968, when an American platoon seems to have abandoned all restraint and engaged in pretty indiscriminate slaughter of civilians. And in recent years, there's been a revived emphasis on the laws of war in both the British and the United States armies, in both cases because of experiences they've been through.
But some believe the emphasis on not attacking civilians isn't just for humanitarian reasons.
In public relations terms, it's a disaster. And militarily, there's no gain whatsoever. That's really the point about why the laws of war and military considerations will generally march hand in hand. That there's no military gain to be achieved from attacking a purely civilian target.
Opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility.
There have already been calls for war crimes trials like those at Nuremberg for atrocities committed in Kuwait.
One has to be very careful before rushing to judgment that there have to be trials, because we don't yet know whether the Allied record in this war will be perfect, and we don't yet know whether there'll be a change of regime in Iraq. If so, it may be that the successor regime itself will put some of the former leaders on trial.